Hello, my name is Claire Powell. I am the Virtual Education USA advisor. I'm assisting the Education USA program based here in South Africa. And just a little bit about us in terms of what we offer and what we present. I just want to make sure that everybody is aware as to who we are. Today, this is the first webinar of a series of 4 that we have on. We have combined school selection and financial aid. So these will be quite the nitty-gritty pieces of the puzzle in terms of your applying to US universities. So I want to make sure that everything that we speak about today is clear and to the point. After today's presentation, this presentation will be in recorded format, as well as what I will be doing is sharing some soft copy handouts of materials that will help you through this process as well. I'm going to move to the next slide. I just want you to send me a little chat message as to whether or not you have you see the next screen that should say, let's see here. Researching the options. Great, thank you guys. So as you know, Education USA prides itself on managing what we call the 5 steps to US study. The first step is probably one of the most crucial steps in terms of researching options. You have to know what you want in order to apply to it, and that's going to become quite an evident piece of the puzzle before you apply to US institutions. As we move on, we will speak about step number 2, which is financing your studies, and those will be the core cruxes of today's presentation. But for those who want to know, steps 3 will be completing your application, step 4, your student visa, and step 5, preparing to go. So we will kind of monitor through that. I'm going to hold questions until the end. So you're welcome to type your questions. I'll see if there's a common theme and I'll answer them as I go, but I'll open the floor for audio questions towards the end. Okay. Okay. So what we have in terms of types of institutions in the United States are public and private institutions. What that would basically entail is your institutions are broken into public that are state or funded by the individual states in the United States. So as you know, there are 50 states in the US, and there's about 650 institutions in the US that are classified as public institutions. So that's just something to be aware of. I see 2 people have raised their hands. If you could just type me a message privately, I'd appreciate that. Because I am going to try and hold questions until the end. Okay. So with regards to continuing on, those 650 public institutions that we have in the United States are funded by the individual state governments of which they are situated in. You will see that what we have listed here is they offer, on an undergraduate level, they will offer either 2 or 4-year degrees. And then at a graduate level, they would, some of them would offer masters and PhDs in addition to that. I would say in the United States, of the US citizens that attend these institutions, 76% of American citizens attend these types of institutions or public institutions. For private, you would either have for non-profit institutions or for-profit. Predominantly, in our case, when we're speaking about tertiary education, and the majority, and especially of the students that are part of the Education USA Scholar Program or Opportunity Fund program, predominantly you will be either applying to public institutions or non-profit private institutions. So non-profit institutions are funded by fees, endowments, and there's over 2,000 offerings of these types of institutions. They are mostly four-year degree granting institutions or master's and PhD level institutions. About 15% of US universities, well, US citizens apply to these or go to these universities. For-profit institutions are funded by fees and run by businesses themselves. These tend to be geared more to vocational or career programs, not too dissimilar to our TVET offerings, or business or computer-oriented institutions. And they tend to be 2 to 4 year degree granting institutions. Very rarely would they offer any sort of graduate work. Okay, I would say about 9% of American citizens would attend undergraduates would attend these types of institutions. So that's just some facts and figures about the types of institutions that you could potentially be exposed to. Okay. Moving along, for our undergraduates that have joined us today, or who are looking to pursue undergraduate level coursework, so that would be either an associate's level degree or a bachelor level degree. Now, if you remember from your first general orientation presentations that you have attended, or if you watched the YouTube video that is available on the Education USA South Africa YouTube page, that these institutions or these types of degrees at undergraduate level are either 2-year or 4-year institutions, or associate or bachelor level granting institutions. They tend to be more vocational, career oriented, and they offer intend to offer associate's degrees. But why they're gaining popularity is because they have such a more value for money focus. They are lower cost, and often the tuition prices aren't nearly as high. Transfer opportunities are available at them. So why this can also be of benefit is some students, maybe you perform well at school, and I know all of you have done well at school or at university, but in some cases you feel like you need to pick up your grades or want an opportunity to still feel it out. Community colleges will allow students to pursue their first 2 years at the community college, and then they offer them what's called articulation agreements with 4-year institutions to allow you, after the completion of your first 2 years, to move to the 4-year institution to complete your final 2 years. So they call this a 2+2 option, and you would come out with a bachelor degree after your additional 2 years at a bachelor institution. Very few of them require standardized testing. If any, they would potentially require you to do some sort of language proficiency, but in most cases I have seen with community colleges that they are fine with South Africans that have attended an English medium high school. Generally though, however, it's important to know that they have rolling deadlines, so their deadlines don't tend to fall on the normal calendar of other institutions that tend to have a early January or early February deadline. Generally, they will take applications up until they feel there won't be enough time to get a visa. So what I generally see this is late June to early July deadlines, so rolling deadlines, meaning that they will look at your application upon receipt, make a decision for the next incoming intake for that year. The downside to it, though, is that generally these institutions don't have housing or meal plans. Very few of them actually do. So what would happen in this case, you would have to look for housing off campus, potentially with, options of roommates or host families or something of that nature. But it's something to look into if you're looking at less stringent requirements or lower cost of tuition. You can see there on the right-hand side of the screen some common fields of study that tend to be offered at community colleges or junior colleges in the US. So when you're looking at institutions and you're trying to decide on what you're going to, how you're going to narrow what's close to, if you're adding up all the institutions that there are in the US, there's over 4,000 offerings. It can be quite overwhelming because all the big names, but there are a lot of other universities out there that can be a great fit for you. And with EducationUSA, one of our strongest kind of, sorry, I can leave the screen there. One of our strongest elements to advising students is that we always are pushing for you to aim to apply for what is known as a best fit. Okay, just like you don't try and force your foot into a shoe that is too small or too big for you, you want to make sure that you are able to go the extra mile, go the long yards in your shoes without getting blisters, and make sure that you're at an institution that is going to help you succeed and go the distance. So one of the items that I will be providing you in terms of additional soft copies or basically what I call worksheets to help you kind of navigate and decide on what to look for in institutions. I'll be sending that through and it will tackle a lot of these selection criteria that we speak about. So location, setting, the size, those sorts of things. So the United States is quite a large, the United States is quite a large area, and it's important to be aware of kind of what that might entail, because the weather, the climate, the people can be very, very different wherever it is. And I think it's important that you research that and you understand the information, the areas that you'll be going into, so that you're comfortable in your potential new setting. I just want to take a pause there. If everybody can just give me a little thumbs up or a little yes as to whether your video and your audio is fine. One person is noting that they cannot see the screen, and another person saying that they cannot hear. But from my understanding, everybody else is okay. But I just want to double check and check in. So if everybody can just give me a little note. Okay, Vera, thank you. You're good. Marielle, good. Great. All right, good, Jamie. Okay, Boucher. Okay, great. Awesome. Okay, I'm just going to continue on. Guys, remember, if for whatever reason, for technical glitches on your side, if for whatever reason you lose your feed or you aren't able to join, this is being recorded and will be shared and available for you to watch thereafter. Okay. So just moving on, as we're speaking about locations, and I'm not just talking about weather, I'm talking about your settings as well. You've got urban, you've got rural, you've got suburban areas to be looking at. So if you're going to go study agricultural sciences, maybe picking a university hot in the center of New York City is not exactly going to be the best angle to approach it. So, be realistic in terms of understanding that. The size of a institution, so for an undergraduate student, you'll be looking at the overall size of an institution. And I think it's important to know that you need to understand where you perform best. So if you perform best in a smaller institution that has more hands-on attention, you probably want to look at institutions that would support that and give that to you. If you wanted to look at an institution that is large, you feel like you have a lot more on offer on the campus, you feel like you flourish in those types of environments, and of course you're going to be looking at a larger institution. For graduate students who are looking at pursuing master's and PhD level work, you're going to look at the individual size of a program rather than the overall size of a campus, because that can just play into the reputation and the selectivity of a program. Although, let's say Columbia has thousands of students on campus, for their creative writing master's program, they only accept 8 students a year. So for master's and PhD level students, they'll be looking specifically at the program versus the institution. You do want to make sure to be looking at reputation and selectivity. And the reason why I say this is because you shouldn't put all your eggs into one basket. You should be applying to a selection of universities, and we will speak about that as the presentation goes on, but also trying to vary your list, or college list if you want to call it, or where you will be applying, in order to make sure that it best supported in that regard. With regards to looking at other factors that kind of fall out of that, you could be looking at religious affiliations, you could be looking at the diversity of the campus, how many people are available on campus, what is the makeup of the student body versus, based on gender, based on ethnicities and various offerings. Does the university actually offer what you want to study? I think that is quite vital in what you are wanting to pursue and wanting to look at. And also being aware of how that major is structured within the university. So at an undergraduate level, it's pretty straightforward. You'll be having your classes listed there for you. And what I would say for master's and PhD level students, what you will be concentrating on more is kind of whether that program that you're hoping to go and study is going to have rather more of a practical element or more theoretical. I think it's important to be aware of that and to look at that. The range of course offerings and program structure. One of the great things about the US education system, and this was said in generally in your general orientations, is that you don't necessarily have to know what you want to study at an undergraduate level in order to enter the university college system. You could join the college and be aware that you go in as an undecided or undeclared major, meaning that because the liberal arts system allows you to take various courses in various different systems, it does allow you to test out the waters and see what you want to pursue. For graduate students, you also want to be able to pursue and understand what the program structure and how it's going to look, again, looking at the theoretical or the practical elements of the program. Okay. Student to faculty ratio, this is going to play a big factor when it comes to undergraduate levels of study, understanding whether you have people that would be, on offer to you. Just remind if everybody can please mute their microphone so we don't have over feedback. It's quite important that one looks at what your access to your professors is, and if on another level to your at a graduate level, to make sure that you are working with the professor in the best way possible. In terms of supervisors. Costs, we're going to go into a bit more in depth about this, but it should be part of your selection criteria. You do want to make sure there's accreditation options available to you, and then research opportunities. Some colleges and universities will offer research opportunities to undergraduate students, and I think that's important to be aware of. But especially at a master's and the PhD level, you want to be sure kind of what the research money that is behind each program and what your opportunities would be to pursue that. I think it can be massively important at a graduate level, because understanding what research opportunities and funding that an institution has behind it will help masters and PhD students also understand whether or not that department can offer them some sort of assistantships that will help with financial aid. Okay, majors. So understanding you're coming to the United States, you're coming to learn, okay? You need to, when you're thinking about how to narrow down your universities, what kind of programs and majors does a university offer? What degrees are offered? So is it, you know, just the bachelor's, or are there some other concentrations or certificates within your major that you can pursue? Are you allowed to double major? So this is your majors would be your major focus field of study that you would like to pursue. So maybe you would, when I talk about a double major, maybe you would be pursuing international relations with another major in economics. So the reason why you can do that in the US is because you take a number of classes, and depending on the number of classes you take will allow you to get what you would call a concentration in that field of study. It's a bit more complicated, and it's probably something that you could discuss with your advisor in an individual session. Okay. So I just want to make sure I see some people are still trying to join us. How easy is it to switch to another program? So meaning that if you don't like what you're studying, how easy is it to move over? Most universities are quite flexible with this. Where I would potentially see issues with is if you want to maybe pursue something like engineering, and you've gone to a more technical university and then wanting to switch to something more arts related. You know, so you need to kind of look at how easy it is to switch within that, and then understand what your major means. So kind of what's involved, what classes do you need to take in order to get that field of study recognition. Okay. So when deciding on the institutions, I would list 2 or 3 potential fields of study or majors you would like to study, just so that you could look at the options to pursue multiple ones, and try and list them in the order of your preference. As a master's and a PhD student, obviously you have this bit more concrete and won't be looking to do that necessarily. But I think it's important that, especially at an undergraduate level, that you do this process of listing 2 or 3 potential fields of study and majors that you would like to pursue, and putting them in order of preference, because in most cases you might be able to pursue multiple ones. Describe to yourself the class setting where you think you would learn best. What size is it? The amount of interaction you have, the type of technology you will be given, and understanding what you want from a classroom setting and from an access to professor setting. This will also help you determine which universities to narrow down. Outside of the classroom, remember, you're going to be there for a number of years in most cases. So you want to make sure that you're having a good quality of life outside of that. I always say you want to make sure a university ticks 3 boxes. You want to make sure that it ticks your academic goals, okay? You want to make sure that it also ticks your personal goals and priorities, and then the third one being your financial goals and priorities, okay? If a university ticks all 3 of those boxes, then it's probably a very good fit to be putting on your list. So outside of the classroom, a bit more on the personal side, your social side. Name 2 to 3 out-of-class non-academic clubs or activities you hope to participate in at college, or at least one of them should be something that you've never tried before. Okay, So just something to kind of take into account. Okay. Describe your ideal location. So we know that the United States is a very big place. It's home to over 350 million people, 50 states, very different climates, from cold and snowy to hot and humid to, dry, deserty, very urban to very rural. So what kind of setting are you looking for? Urban, suburban, rural, or is the town completely centered around the university or college that it's located? And also understand that the location of your school greatly determines the cost of living. What I've noticed that we tend to do as international students is that we tend to focus on the West Coast and the Northeastern or the East Coast of the United States. And we tend to forget about the Midwest and southern part of the US in terms of institutions. And often what you'll find is those institutions tend to offer lower tuition and also offer lower cost of living. That means your room and board will be significantly less. And you'll see that in our financial aid slides. I'll point out some Midwestern schools in comparison to some New York and California schools, and you'll see the price difference that tends to become quite obvious. Also consider the course of study and the surrounding opportunities. So, what is your access, within those locations? If you're a business major, maybe, studying in New York or, Durham, North Carolina, let's say, would be of your benefit just because the amount of Fortune 500 companies that are located in those areas. So your opportunities for internships would be greater. So, kind of keeping that in mind, or potentially that your own professors that you'd be exposed to are from those types of environments. Admissions, you need to consider the selectivity of your choice of universities and schools and what the admission requirements, because as we've come to really understand from the United States, the admission requirements are not going to be the same for one school over the other. They're going to vary in slight variation. So do they require test scores for the SAT, the ACT, the GRE, or the TOEFL? Do they require interviews? Do they not require interviews? If you're looking at pursuing performing arts or fine arts, do you have to put a portfolio together? Do you have to audition? If you're pursuing engineering, do you have to, potentially put forward SAT subject test scores? As a master's and PhD level student, do you have to be published? Do you have to have done some sort of research work? Do you need multiple recommendation letters or just one recommendation letter? So you need to understand the admission requirements for each individual institution that you apply to. Cost and financial aid. So find out how much aid is given to international students. Most institutions are going to have a policy for domestic US citizens and permanent residents and have a separate policy for international students. Okay, so you need to understand that of the individual university and if they offer that funding to an international student. Look for specialized programs that guarantee financial aid. Of course, the more financial aid you need, the more competitive the programs or the admission for that institution is going to be. Consider the cost of living of the location when calculating costs. So as I said before, please do not overlook Midwestern and Southern state schools. Scholarships and funding, is it merit-based, so based on your grades or your marks at school and your test scores on the standardized testing, or is it need-based? So is the university going to look at what your family situation is and determine based on that how much funding they would offer you? Okay. Skills, also to help you determine your institutions. List 2 skills, i.e. languages, computer skills, writing, public speaking, lab skills, statistical analysis, etc. you would like to gain from college or university. Mention 2 areas of interest or knowledge that you would like to explore. these should all be outside of your potential major. This just helps you narrow down your choice of universities to make sure that you're getting a holistic experience. Okay. What other factors matter to you and your personal preferences? Do you feel the need to have other South Africans learning at your university or your college, other Africans? And what will you bring and want from diversity during your college or university experience? Know yourself. So this is a quote from a former EducationUSA scholar, I think based out of our Ghanaian embassy. So there's a reason why I didn't apply to Harvey Mudd or MIT or Caltech. I was not a science student, so it wouldn't have made sense to do that. My academic background wouldn't have helped because I had taken no advanced science courses in high school. So my application to a school like MIT would have been very weak. I knew I wanted to do economics and maths, so I knew I needed a school with that social science and artsy field. For example, a Pomona, a Williams, or an Amherst. Okay, so knowing yourself and applying. I will be providing handouts to you. I thought I could share some files here, but if you hang on after the presentation, I might be able to share a Google Drive link. Otherwise, what I will do is I will email the Google Drive link out to all of you so that you can access these files and download them at your own time in order to do your research before meeting with your advisors. Of course, there are search engines that you can look at. So College Board is a great one for undergraduates. Peterson's is good also for undergraduates as well as graduate students. There are some great EducationUSA resources on the official EducationUSA page, so educationusa.state.gov. And one that I think people find very boring, but I do love because it gives you all the statistics in black and white, including what matters the most to a university and what doesn't necessarily matter too much to them with regards to your application. But it's collegedata.com. They've got tabs talking about financial aid. They've got a tab talking about the diversity and the makeup of the student body, and you know, about admission. So it's not the prettiest website, but it's, I feel, has a wealth of information to provide students. Okay, I'm going to move on to financing your studies because this is a crucial part when looking at your universities and deciding what you want to pursue in terms of the institutions. And funny enough, when I first started in this role and they first introduced the 5 steps to US study, they actually had financing your studies after completing your application. But what is so crucial in researching your universities as an international student, especially if you are looking for funding, is to understand whether or not the university can provide funding to you as a student. So you want to make sure that you understand that policy of a university, and if you need money and that university doesn't offer you support as an international student, then it shouldn't be on your list. You shouldn't put the time in applying to that institution. So financing a US education. The United States is the only country where universities award significant funding to international students. Okay, we have seen some competition come up of recent years with the likes of China and Russia, but overall the United States still ranks #1. Knowledge and planning are the students' and families' responsibility. Okay, you need to understand what's going to be the benefit for you. Your advisors and myself, we are there to add advice and recommendations, but at the end of the day, you are your own individual person, and finding your right fit is going to end up being your responsibility. The United States expects families to pay as much as they possibly can, and each school has its own budget and policy for international financial aid, as I discussed before. College and university costs. Bad news, it can be very expensive. 79% of international undergraduate students pay for their US education primarily with family funds. The good news, of course, is that financial aid does exist. So the facts: comprehensive annual cost ranges from $18,000 a year to about $70,000 a year. Just over 1,000 institutions award financial aid above $10,000 to international students. 557 institutions award aid above $20,000 a year. 290 award aid above $30,000 a year, and only 250 can meet students' full financial need. Okay, and I'm not just talking about when I say full financial need, I'm not just talking about tuition. I'm talking about the total cost of attendance. So that would, as we see, will not only be tuition and room and board, but it will be some other factors. Some more questions. What assumptions do students and families make about financing their US education? And do you genuinely need aid or merely want it? All right. What would you do if there was no financial aid? Would you still be applying? So a little bit on a reality check. Admission with full funding is highly competitive. Don't apply to any schools that cannot fill your needs on an academic, financial, or personal basis, as I noted before. Don't apply for more aid than you genuinely need. Some cost examples, okay? Oh, not need to switch over so quickly. So disclaimer on some of the following costs for 2016-2017. You have your tuition and fees and room and board, and we're going to look at a comprehensive number on the next few screens as to what tuition and room and board looks like at individual universities. But there's some other costs involved that add up to the total cost of attendance. So for an international student, you're looking at your book and personal expenses that can be basically about $1,200 to $2,500 a piece. So being aware of that. Travel costs are often not included in your packages, and medical insurance is not included, and that's an additional $500 to $2,000 a year. All right. There are some institutions that have come to understand that these are significant burdens on students, and they do include this in their financial aid packages. But I would say maybe a handful of institutions actually do that. So that's just something also to be aware of. I can maybe think of 7 or 8 institutions that would look to potentially help with air tickets and other personal expenses as part of your financial aid package. Okay. How much can your parents afford, or you as a graduate student afford to spend per year times the program duration? So is it going to be 4 years as an undergraduate? Is it going to be 2 years as a graduate, 3 years as a graduate, 4 years, 5 years as a PhD? You know, understanding those elements. What sources of funding can you obtain? So public institutions. So I'm starting with a community college out in Kansas. So this is a Midwestern school. And it's probably the cheapest one that I've been able to find in terms of the combined tuition and room and board estimates. So you'll see there for state residents, the left-hand column, you can see the cost differentiation between the American citizens that live in those states, and then what those universities would charge to non-residents or international students at those universities. It's also important to understand that public institutions, although they offer lower tuition than private institutions, often don't have as much funding available to international students. There are a few that have special programs, like the University of Wisconsin has a scholarship focused on students from the African continent, but primarily public institutions will be taking care of their state residents first. Okay, so you can see there from the community college in Kansas, there's not a significant difference between the costs, but if you move up to the likes of University of California, Berkeley, sorry, or the University of Virginia, you can see the cost is quite a significant jump between residents and non-residents. Private institutions, so remember there's over 2,000 institutions of this nature. So Oral Roberts University in Oklahoma is about a $45,000 a year institution. Upwards, if you're looking at Harvard University, you know, they offer, well, their price tag is over close to $77,000 a year. So that's important to understand that. I would say the difference is Harvard, if you get into that institution, they are what is termed a need blind school. So they don't determine what your financial situation is when admitting you, and they look to meet 100% demonstrated need of students that get in. So to put it bluntly, if you get into Harvard, they will make sure that you can come because they will look to pay your full need. And we'll talk a little bit about how they determine that. So sources of funding, so parents or other family members or sponsors. Institutional financial aid, so this could be need-based, so based on what they've determined is your family or individual need, or merit-based, based on your marks and test scores, or other variation. Maybe they really need an oboe player in their orchestra and you are an oboe player. So they're going to give you a scholarship in order to sweeten the deal, if you want to call it. On-campus work, as an international student, you are eligible to work up to 20 hours a week on campus. And most institutions will include this in your financial aid packages so that you can have pocket money or money for your personal expenses. So outside scholarships like agencies and foundations. So for instance, here in South Africa, at a graduate level for master's and PhD level students, we have a Fulbright scholarship that is open to help students, you know, looking to pursue graduate education. Sports scholarship, so if you are playing at a provincial or a national level in a sport, it may be worth looking at sports scholarships. It is quite involved, and I would highly recommend you speak to your advisor separately about this. We have seen religious organizations offer some form of funding. So, you know, there are other options to look at. So the types of funding, as we said before, are need-based aid. So need-based aid tends to be when a university looks at you as the student and looks at your family situation, and they determine what is a realistic number for you to put towards your education. And then they would look at whether or not they could cover that gap between their sticker price and what you can afford. There are universities that meet 100% demonstrated need. There's others that meet, you know, about 60% demonstrated need. So, you know, that needs to come into your equation when looking at institutions. Merit-based aid is primarily, as I said before, based on your scores, your of testing, your marks at school. It could be based on other leadership skills or talents that you may have. And then you've got institutions that also have hybrids of that nature. So they'll use a combination of need and merit-based aid. A reality check. The more you need, the greater the competition. Many full need universities admit less than 5% of applicants. And need-based aid obviously goes to students with the greatest merit. So you need to stand out, and sometimes it's not just your grades that make you stand out, but it's the other personal holistic pieces of your application and your personal story that adds to that. So need blind admissions, as I said before, so full need can be met. There's other institutions that they might have full funding, but they're a bit need sensitive in their admissions. So that while, let's say, Harvard doesn't take your financial situation into consideration when doing the admission process of admitting you to an institution, the likes of a Vanderbilt University, although they can meet 100% demonstrated need, whether or not you can afford it will be a factor whether or not they admit you, okay, because they have a limited budget. There is need-based, but with limits to a maximum amount. So I often think in this of a university in Washington, like Whitworth University, they have a limit of about, I think it's about $25,000 that they can offer need-based aid, and they try and make that up with additional merit-based aid. Okay, some institutions, and this tends to be the more public institutions, have a standard flat amount that they can offer to international students, and there's not much more or less that they can do about that. There's earmarked countries or majors. So, like for instance, I know I seem to be mentioning them a lot, but I was at Vanderbilt University a couple of years ago, and they said specifically that they had a lot of engineers, but they seemed to have a lot of computer engineers, but they were hungry for civil engineers. So they were, going to concentrate on admitting more civil engineers into their programs. We had a community college a few years back that was very interested in looking at applications from students specifically from South Africa. So that's important to know. And I've already gone over merit and sport base before. Okay. Financial aid forms, these are often separate from the admissions application and vary by institution. You can require information on basically on your family income, assets such as house, savings and investments, annual taxes, how many family members are in a university. You can also consult websites for net price calculators on how to determine this, and most universities under their financial aid tab on their websites would provide information on how to calculate it. So basically this indicates how much a student or family is expected to pay, but it does consider grades or your marks, your test scores, activities, financial aid circumstances. Remember that this estimate that you look at online is not official. You will only get that after admission. So how financial aid packages are determined depends on each school's budget and policy. Starts with calculation of students' contribution, okay? And then they do an analysis and formula to determine the expected family contribution, and the needs-based aid tops up the EFC. And there can be subjective factors that we said before. So limited grant funding is available to highest achieving international applicants on a need basis. So there are various forms. At an undergraduate level, you will see the CSS profile online. I have seen a couple of graduate programs actually use the CSS profile, but they also have, it costs money to submit the CSS profile. So some universities allow international students to submit a paper-based form of the CSS profile. That's called the International Student Financial Aid Application. Okay, so here's a copy of it, and I'll put that in a link to Google Drive too. Some other resources, all these websites will be in a list, a financial aid handout that I'll provide you guys, and then you can click on the websites and visit them in your own time. Okay, just understanding scholarships and grants. We've been through this, but just to understand the academic, the sports talent, scholarships specifically for music, art and drama, leadership skills and financial need. Student athletes, if you are looking to pursue sports, I would highly recommend that you reach out to your advisor and you speak to them a little bit more in depth about this. What I can also recommend is EducationUSA Global Office in Washington has done a couple of webinars specifically on sports scholarships. And I think those would be highly advantageous for you to watch and go into, because you could spend a whole nother hour just on sports scholarships and how that whole process works. There are loans, but I always put red flags on this, and the reason why I say that is because of the exchange rate, it can be very costly to take out a loan, and then more often than not, you do need a US citizen co-signer. Okay, so, but if you are looking, maybe there's a small amount you need covered, I would highly recommend you shop around and be very aware of interest rates. We spoke about on-campus work before, and you are limited to 20 hours a week. While school is in session, you can work full-time, so 40 hours a week when you're on breaks. So on average, minimum wage is $7.25. So the working out, it's not a lot of money. As I said, it's really going to be for general expenses. Employment off campus is only allowed after successful completion of the first year of studies, unless you can prove dire economic circumstances, and you need to receive permission from your institution and the Bureau of Citizenship and Immigration Services. This is not guaranteed, and you're still limited to 20 hours a week. Okay, but you will need to speak to the designated school official once you get to campus about that. For graduates and professional students, you also have options of fellowships. So these are positions that grant financial aid to graduate students while allowing for study in a specific field. Assistantships are positions that grant financial assistance to graduate students while in exchange for teaching duties or research duties. Things to consider include work and/or tax requirements, the benefits afforded to your program, and the length of time the assistance is available. Okay, how to improve your chances. Go the extra mile. More research means you go in a more enhanced application. Optional components. If there's optional, I recommend you do them, okay, because it's only going to strengthen and give them more information about you. Don't accept, is this good enough? Always see if there's room for improvement, and rather you should say, what else can I do to strengthen my application? Remember, demonstrate your worth before your need. Points to consider: research institutions early, create a calendar of deadlines, especially if you're looking at early deadlines. Conduct online scholarship searches based on the websites that I'll provide you in the handout. Create your own scholarship database based on the ones that you are eligible for. Check often as new items may be added. Contact your top choice universities. Be realistic and plan for your full program, not just 1 year. And think about options to bolster your academic preparation and the affordability of the institution. So again, Midwestern and Southern School, as an example, can give you a better option in terms of affordability. Okay, I'm going to open it up to questions now. So feel free to put it in the chat box or to raise your hand, and I can also let you speak if you wish to. But I will give it about 5 minutes for questions, and then you're always welcome to email me after today's presentation if you have more questions or more concerns. I'm actually just going to type my email address into the chat box now. Yeah. So does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask? I know it's a lot of information, so if you feel like you need to go back and digest it and rewatch it and read all the handouts, I will not be offended. Any questions? Ideal SAT score. I think that's a magic question that is always asked, and it's very hard to pinpoint. There are some public institutions where they will tell you kind of what the minimum is that they're looking for, and you'll see that on their website. But for more liberal arts schools, or what I would call, holistic looking schools, you can't always put a number on, because there's so many different factors that go into an application. You know, what's the rigor of your curriculum that you've had at school? Did you take every opportunity that was presented to you at school? What have you been doing outside of the classroom? How have you affected your communities? What are your leadership skills? Sometimes, you know, at these more competitive schools, yes, they look at your SAT scores and it does become important to them. But it's more important for you to have good grades at your individual school and that you've done well in your school's actual context. With regards to the TOEFL, so the TOEFL, we're going to do a standardized test workshop next week, and I think that will kind of provide you a lot more information. But the TOEFL is basically an English language test. In order to qualify to get into a US university and actually to receive your visa, you need to prove that you can, you're English proficient. But what tends to happen is, because you're in South Africa and if you're at an English medium school or you get a decent enough score on your SAT, you can have that option waived. But that is something that I would speak to your advisor. With regards to who your advisor is, so if you are based in Cape Town or in the Eastern Cape, your advisor, or the Northern Cape, your advisor would be Alice King, and you've been working with her primarily on that. If you are in Johannesburg and Pretoria, you would be dealing with Justina or Bongi. If you are in Durban and you're part of the Scholar program, you would deal with Susan Knowles. There are a select few that work with me directly. If you are unsure, please send me a separate email and I will direct you to who your person of contact is. Okay. Mariel, you said, what's the difference between the CSS profile and ISPA? Technically nothing. They are the same. One is online and one is paper-based, and you don't need to fill out both. You would need to check with the university. I would say first prize, if you can send in the ISPA, that's good, because then you save yourself some money of having to submit CSS. So always check with the university as to what their preference is. Okay. Just trying to see here. With scholarships, if you get a scholarship in music, for example, are you expected to study a course that is related to that scholarship, or are you allowed to study other interests and participate in music in other ways? If you are going to get a scholarship in music, I would say predominantly it would be for you to study that, but study that music, but it doesn't preclude you from maybe doing a minor degree in business or another area of study. That's the beauty of the US, is that you can marry a number of subjects of field together. So yeah, there's just something to be aware of. Again, something to speak about with your advisor, and it would depend on the individual institution. See if I've missed anything. Don't worry about GPAs, weighted GPAs. If you are looking at the Common App, we'll speak about this at the Completing Your Application workshop. You should be leaving anything about the GPA on the Common App blank, because it's not applicable to your South African system, to the South African education system. So there are some state universities that absolutely require you to do a conversion, but that is something that you can speak with your advisor about. And Dani, I'd be more than happy to help you look at that. Okay. Get everybody. Any more questions? Oh, one new message. So you notice that most universities require official transcripts to be sent through. Do we ask our counselors to email it to all the individual universities? First prize is actually to get your counselor from the school to email it to the universities. If you are doing Common App, your council will upload it into the system, and that is considered official for admission purposes. And then if you're successful in getting into the university, you will have to take certified hard copies with you to the universities. Okay, Education USA can help in some cases, but first prize is your individual counselors at school. Okay. I'm going to leave it there because we have run over time, and I'm mindful of everybody's days. Some of you are in the midst of exams, so I would recommend getting back to studying. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that I've enlightened you a little bit more and enabled you to do a little bit more research and a bit more kind of hoping it helps you narrow down your choices and understanding the financial aid process. But any questions you have, do not be afraid to email me, and please be on the lookout for the Google Drive link of the handouts that should help you with researching and financial aid. You've been great. I've loved the interaction. I have to say it's probably one of the best webinars I've been on in a long time. So thanks for joining us. And I look forward to speaking to you next week about standardized testing. All right. Bye for now. Take care.